Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight, we are joined by my friend Spekingr Daniel Young to talk to us about right action, a path to piety. Um, Top of the show stuff. Thank you to everybody at Njordshof who made Disa Thing an amazing event. I was very fortunate to get to go and visit that Hof and see those folks again. It was a wonderful weekend. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for everybody who came out that I got to meet and share that weekend with. It's absolutely fantastic. Next up, we have Austra at Thorshof. Thorshof is in Linden, North Carolina, and that's going to be March 20th through the 22nd. If you can make it there, you absolutely should. That is that district's largest event of the year. Amazing people are going to be there. I'm excited to bring my family over for it, so I would love to meet you guys there if I haven't yet, or see you again if it's been a minute. So yeah, make the effort if you can. It's going to be an amazing event, and it's going to be real special for you guys. Hope y'all can show up. Other stuff on the top of the program. Weekly update on Phrasehof and Phrasehof Paydown. We are doing really well. You guys continue to be amazingly generous. We've had a few donations come in the last hour or so, so this is not entirely accurate, but we're sitting somewhere around 35.6% paid off. That comes out to about $109 per member. $109 per member would pay it off today. You guys have been extremely generous and continue to be, so thank you guys for that. Speaking of generosity, as he so often does, so regularly does, GW Farnsworth started off program with $30 towards the heat situation at Thorshof and $30 towards our latest folk services effort for one of our members. So thank you for that. We appreciate you. Also, Sarah donated $25 to our folk services helping out a member. Wonderful. We appreciate you. Caleb donated $50 towards that same folk services campaign. Thank you, Caleb. Another amazing and continuous donor, so we appreciate you. And Nick in Ohio donated $10 each to Phrasehof, Sigerheim, the Asatru Academy, and the folk services fundraiser. So thank you for that. We really appreciate you. And Stephen in Japan donated $10 each to the Thorshof Heat and towards paying off Phrasehof. So we appreciate you, Stephen. Other stuff, we have somebody that started off with a provocative question tonight, and I suppose we get to that before we get to the meat, just because it's there and we won't leave it hanging. I would really like to hear some sort of a response to the accusations that Njordshof was partially paid with a sum of money from convicted child predator, the exchange of our virtues for money. I have no knowledge of Njordshof being paid off by a sum of money donated by any child predator or anybody sketchy that way. This is news to me. I wasn't aware that those were accusations, but to my knowledge, there's nothing to that. I've never heard that before until right now. Daniel, are you aware of some sort of child molester helping us in a substantial way to pay off Njordshof?
No, it just sounds like troll stuff as per usual.
Well, see, that's the thing. There's a lot of that, and there's a lot of bad actors. But I think, I never know if the people who come here and ask those kind of things, if they're well-intentioned, then they just genuinely don't know better. And it's a fair question to ask. But
I don't think the question was a troll move, but I think wherever he's getting his information from, possibly that would be.
Yeah, I think most certainly some confusion there. But yeah, so this was your idea to come on today and talk about this. Our Our law speaker was taking the night off, and you had an idea for a show. So I'm going to let you run with it and tell us about right action and how it's a path to piety.
Well, first, I appreciate the law speaker having the night off and making some room for me to come in and use this platform to try to hammer out some concepts that seem to be extremely grand, but as is my way, I like to try to reduce them down to a fairly simple form. So first, before we get into the meat and taters of that particular topic, we've often referred to this concept, and the phrase was coined by our founder, Stephen McNallen, and he refers to this as the soul sickness. So how do we determine what that is? I think that we can take a look at what's going on in the modern world, specifically in the West, and kind of see these things playing out. And I think before we talk about what the cure is, we have to be honest about what the sickness is. And I don't mean it metaphorically, but it's something that we can see. We see it in addiction, appetite with no order, men and women who are ruled by impulses, no longer in control, alcohol, drugs, pornography, rage even, sometimes even attention. That's disorder. We see this play out like in broken families, where loyalty is treated as something that's temporary and something that is disposable. Vows are treated as flexible. Children grow up without stability because adults lack discipline. And we see that with broken families. This is a misalignment. Also, the most tragic of all of these examples of the soul sickness, we see this in suicides. These are souls that have lost their orientation, have no sense of purpose or place, or no connection to something higher, and have no feeling of standing in a line with folks in front of them and folks behind them. The folks in front being descendants, the folks behind them being our ancestors. When meaning collapses, the soul collapses with it. And we see it in something even quieter and something less, I guess, shocking, but it's, casual betrayal. It's the toleration of gossip, oaths that get broken without shame. All of these have the same root, and that root is disorder. Appetite without discipline, pride with no humility, and freedom without responsibility. The sickness of the soul is living with no alignment. And if disorder is the sickness, then piety, correctly understood, is the restoration of that order. Not emotion, not aesthetics, it's not a Facebook post, it is complete alignment. One of the more trendy words that we'll hear from either, fitness influencers or quote unquote life coaches, the word that they like to lean on, that I'm going to use, and I try not to use it cheaply, is holistic. When everything in our lives is in perfect alignment with a higher ideal. And that's proven through correct and right action. Now, this may sound like some sort of, this has come off as like a fluffy bunny, self-help, guru kind of thing. What is right action? It's simply just doing the right thing to begin with. So we have to be in alignment and in reverence with our gods, the I-Seer. First and foremost, let me pause and go back a little bit. Everything is downstream from identity. Spirituality and religion comes immediately after identity, because if we see the world through a folkish lens without having that ethnic identity and knowing it, then it's hard to get aligned with what your spirituality and religion should be. Now, we as white folks, as Caucasians, as Aryans, we are in troth to the I-Seer. This is the first of the steps towards that cure. And how we approach, how we see them, and how we speak of them is a reflection of that alignment and a reflection of piety. And what is piety? It's a word that you might hear fairly often here on Victory Never Sleeps. You might hear it at your house. You might hear it at, your pub moots. But we want to clearly define that. It's when your faith is so obvious that it's plain to see, and it's seen through your deeds and not just through your words. It's not seen through your Facebook post, your Instagram stories. It's seen through your actions. And those actions have to reflect that reverence to the Iseer, to the Iseer, to the ancestors, and to the greater folk. We also have another outward display of piety is we have our troth with the Aesir, and next is our frith to our brothers and sisters that are united in truth, united by frith. This is a symbol of ordered alignment, right? Father McNowlin, when he wrote his book Asatru, A Native European Spirituality, it became something of a catchphrase, but it was prominently printed on the back of that book and talked about within that book about how Asatru is about connections with the divine, connections with our ancestors, connections with those who come after us, and connections to each other. I'm not going to say that because we don't believe in equality, there's not an equal connection, but all of them have an extreme importance. The connection to our gods is important. Honoring our ancestors by living in a way that they were recognized as courageous and honorable is important. But just as important is that frith that binds us, that links us together. Now, frith isn't just simply like, peace with no cost. Like, well, we're just going to keep the peace and say nothing. It's something totally different than that. And this is one of those examples of what right action is. So if, my brother, brother in the faith, my brother in the clergy, it could be the ulterior go through. Because of the frith between us, and it is my duty to protect their reputation. I'm going to use Matt as an example. It's my duty to protect Matt's reputation, especially in his absence. If someone were to sit at my table and, begin gossiping and, just saying these outlandish things, true or not true, doesn't matter. But the gossiping thing, that is the first drop of like social poison that can get these things spiraling out of control. And my duty, our duty, is to squash that immediately. We give someone correction whenever they start this gossiping stuff, and again, this is just a simple example, but I try to think of things in the most simple form, right? So we don't eliminate that, and it becomes this infection. It becomes something greater than just someone whispering and idle chatter. We correct that person immediately, and that's not done just out of my frith to Matt. That's out of the frith between me and the person that's speaking. I owe them a certain level of accountability. So I correct them, and if they persist and they correct it again, if they refuse the correction, they need to get up from my table. Now, piety doesn't necessarily change how you behave. It's an example of how you behave. We correct gossip instead of just enjoying it. We speak truth without being cruel to one another. We train our bodies. Or keep our word. We show up prepared. And I can give you an example of that as well. I, as a clergy member, if I were to show up at my hof and I'm wearing, ratty old work clothes, I'm a mechanic by trade. So if I'm coming to work, all oiled up and filthy looking and all that stuff, and I get myself cleaned up and throw on my suit, and now I've stepped in, I'm in priest mode. I have to show up prepared. And that same principle applies. We show up in a devoted worship. We show up unified by devoted worship to our Iseer. We show up ready for that immediately. It's not like we switch from one mode to the next, because all of these things, again, to use that word holistic, should be flowing, down a highway. The road doesn't change. There's no different lanes here. It's a single road toward the same goal. We lead our household with a steady hand, with fairness, and again with accountability in mind, because we're all representatives of each other. And another example of that is how we present ourselves to our gods. And that's not just about the clothes we wear or whether we're well shaved or groomed. It's how we approach them in pious action. And what do I mean by that? We don't show up and immediately go into what we don't do. Like, oh, well, I'm not going to bend a knee. Or I'm not going to prostrate myself. I'm not going to take this, pious posture. So that's wrong think. In the early generations of Asatru, it was a common theme, modern Asatru specifically. It was a common theme that, what we don't do is what defines us. And they often would say things like, we don't kneel before our gods, we stand among them, we stand with them. And well, that's not coming from a place of malice, and it's not coming from a place of, intended disrespect. It was more of a separation from what they were used to when it came to dealing with, the Christian church. And anything that was seen as remotely Christian was cast aside. And I want to make a clear distinction here that piety, devotion, and respect did not originate with Christianity. We could show archaeological evidence and artistic evidence throughout the ages of showing, men in Europe prostrating themselves before their gods. But anyway, so right action doesn't have to be dramatic. It's simply it begins in the mind, as does piety. So we start creating these habits, and these habits reshape our soul. Pride that says I don't kneel, or I don't submit, or I don't need correction, or I know enough, that's misguided. Properly ordered pride is what leads to dignity. In the Asatru faith, we don't shun the idea of ego. We do shun the idea of, fluffery, where we, it's bragging about something, simply mundane or something like that. It's not the same as being, braggadocious. But having an ego, a healthy ego, a well-trained ego, is seen as something good. Because we see ourselves as worthy of the attention of our divine gods and goddesses, and we see ourselves in an elevated position, that's not the same as the negative aspects of ego. Negative aspects of ego are, specifically pointing out that, someone else doesn't meet your standard, and holding other people to this extremely high standard that you may hold yourself to. And not everybody's meant to be ubermensch. Because if we're all excellent, then no one is. The key is to be more excellent. There's a difference between dignity and defiance. One is ordered, and other is a reaction. So rather than we don't kneel before our gods, how about we willingly kneel before our gods, or we willingly prostrate ourselves before our gods? There's an example, and I can't remember exactly from what age. I think it was Bronze Age statue that was found either in Scandinavia or found somewhere in Western or Central Europe, of a man that was on one knee with his hands out, almost in the algae position. It's a clear sign. That's a clear representation of a pious, a pious way of presenting the self before our gods. So these things need to become repetition. Sometimes it's daily things, small things. It could be something seriously unseen. You can't think your way into piety. You have to act your way into piety. So what does this look like in our day-to-day lives? I think one example is this idea that we are the latest representation in a long line of folk, of our ancestors, of the people that came before us, and that every action that we take is not necessarily mundane, seemingly mundane. Some things are more sacred than others, but all of the actions that we take, there is at least sacrality involved with even the most minor of things. Am I carrying myself in a way that my grandfather would be proud? Am I carrying myself in a way that my grandmother would be happy that I would carry myself that way? Am I being respectful to my elders? Am I, being a good employer, being a good, teammate? So every day we rise with intention. This can be simple. This can be rising every day and going through your normal hygiene stuff, going to your altar and saying your prayers, beginning the day with movement, whether that's doing some calisthenics or going for a brisk walk around the block, using clean speech. And look, I'm super guilty about using profanity at the wrong times, because I don't think there's really ever really a right time to do that, because we have to present ourselves in a way that reflects the dignity that's expected of not only of not just clergy or folk builders, that's worthy of Arians. Now, sometimes a well-timed use of profanity to help deliver emphasis or something like that, that's a different topic. But we refuse sloppiness. Again, it's this idea of rejecting the idea that kind of letting things kind of fall where they may, and that everything has some kind of order to it. And I don't use the term humble yourself in the way that like I was brought up. So I was brought up, I'm a child of the South, right? And, I've had this conversation with Tyler Bethea. He and I are, from the same state, grew up in the same culture, and brought up much the same way. We would hear this from our fathers and uncles and grandfathers, like, humble yourself, boy, taking on no airs. That's not the same thing that I'm talking about. A good way of explaining that is if, someone were asking Mr. Flavel a question about a certain topic, especially when it comes to, Asatru or just life in general. Not only because of my position, but because I recognize his spiritual authority, I know to sit there and be quiet and listen. Speak whenever it's appropriate, rather than just kind of like talking over the guy. He is the high priest of the ICU. I don't have a whole lot more to add than what it is he has to offer. If that makes sense. If Mr. Flavel is given, if he was talking to a class of clergy students and he was teaching them, bloat structure and stuff like that, interrupting him would be absolutely inappropriate, because I'm humble enough to realize that, he sits at the top of this pyramid for a reason. Now, that's not to say that I won't, share my opinions after he's done speaking or any of those things, or share my point of view on a certain topic. That's not the same as just jumping in and interrupting somebody that sits at a high seat. So repetition restores order in our lives, and that order restores strength, and that strength, it restores health. Alignment produces clarity. And again, clarity does produce that strength, and that strength also produces peace, produces frith. It knows that the man sitting next to me can count on me to have his back. Now, these are some examples of what right action is. Let me give some examples of what right action is not. So I'm assuming many of the listeners, or probably nearly all of them, at one point, whether it was by choice or because that's what their parents did, they followed the Abrahamic faith. In the West, that would be Christianity. There's a list of don'ts. So if I don't do all of these things, then I'm seen as a righteous man. That's not right action. The lack of doing something bad doesn't mean you're doing something good. So we instead live our lives by virtues. And I don't need to go down the entire list, but the chief among them is courage. So piety isn't just a feeling. It's something that we do. If we act rightly long enough, the soul can catch up. So we see our soul as broken into components. And I'm not going to list them all, but you have the obvious ones. The leak, which is the body. This is the vehicle in which we are put here in Midgard to be able to work our will, to work the will of our ancestors and the will of the Aesir. And there's the mental part of this. There's the many, which is the memory. And then there's Hewer, which is more the logical mind. Now, through some of this right action, we can begin to cure this soul sickness. What does that right action look like when it comes to the varying parts of our soul? Well, I just listed 3 that were pretty obvious. The leak, the physical body, train it. Take care of it. If my father had given me one car and said, this is the only car that you're going to have for the rest of your life, I'd have the oil change, transmission fluid done, all the filters done, all the joints taken care of, all the bearings. I would care for that car as if it was going to have to last me the entirety of my life. Well, that's what our body is. And then there's the mental aspect of it. There's the many, which is the memory. And I see a lot with folks when it comes to this particular part of the soul complex that kind of holds them back is that they become, chained to something in the past. It could be past trauma. It could be, past experiences. And it could also be that, resting on our laurels, like thinking back on like past victories and just, I did this one real cool thing and I don't have to do nothing else. Also is just wrong think. And of course, there's the Hewer, the logical mind. I think that in a way to repair that is to, one simple example is stop the doom scrolling. I'm not suggesting that there's not wrong things going on in the world, but this obsession with, trying to find every little problem in the world and thinking that, you yourself can fix it or just your complaining about it is going to do anything about it. A little boy fell in a well in New Hampshire. Nothing I can do about that. But what I can do is take care of what's right in front of me. And it's where we put our focus that matters. So we don't just drift into piety. We have to kind of discipline ourselves into it. We don't have to be loud. We don't have to be reactionary, but we have to be as restorative. It's arriving with the right mindset. It's arriving knowing where you fit in the structure of all things. Again, we don't see our gods as equals. We don't see ourselves, and we each other as human beings are not equals. There is hierarchy that does exist. Now, how you choose to address that hierarchy rests largely on yourself. Now, I've used several examples here, and I'm willing to open the floor up to questions and maybe some conversation with Mr. Flavel.
All right, well, let's get to some of the questions we've gotten. Before we get to that, Gilbert donated $150 towards folk services. Thank you for that, Gilbert. And also $150 towards the heat at Thorshoff. Much appreciated. Rachel donated $40 to folk services. Thank you, Rachel. And Stephen donated $10 to folk services. Thank you. We appreciate that. We got a continuation of the earlier topic on a couple of questions, and we need to get it out of the way so we can move on to other things. So I want to assure people we'll answer any questions that we get, but also not going to derail the whole show and stop people mid-presentation to answer demanding questions. So I finally see what they were talking about the Njordshof thing. Let me see where they're putting it here. I think they've conflated things, or there was some confusion. Said, so you both are saying that Jason from No White Guilt didn't send you a guy with a degenerate background that later applied to the AFA, and now you're paying him back with interest. There's a number of things that are kind of mixed up there, but no, that's not what we're saying. What was asked was, did a child predator substantially help us pay off Njordshof? That's not true, and I'd never heard that. No, turns out the guy that was sent to us well after we made the deal with him to borrow the money for Njordshof, turns out that guy's a homosexual. Later, he did apply for membership in the AFA, and we rejected his membership because him being a homosexual makes him not eligible to be a member. That absolutely happened, and nobody's denying that. Was followed up by, is it pious to lie about where the money from Njordshof came from? Nobody's ever lied about that. Not at all. This is the first time that you asked, and I gave you an answer. We're not still paying him off, though. The Njordshof has been paid off for quite some time. Yes, there was interest because it was a commercial loan. Or I don't know if commercial loan is the right word for it. It was a commercial transaction through loan. I think again, I'm not sure. I think there's a legal thing with what a commercial loan is or isn't. But yeah, there's a person who loaned us money. The variety of people at the bank that would loan us money that are any number of things. But yeah, the guy that was sent to us, turns out that guy was in fact homosexual. And when he applied, we said, no, you cannot join because you're homosexual. And that was not pleasing to him. And I doubt he would lend us money in the future because of that circumstance. The other question was, to follow up the first one, what would you do if you found out that it was factually correct that the money was given from a convicted sex offender? How would that be handled? And I want to be completely honest. Yes, I realize that the answer that a particular crowd would like would be, we just give it all back. But realistically, probably wouldn't do that. Probably wouldn't go back in and take out a loan or whatever to pay back a substantial portion of money that was already paid to purchase a hoff for us. No, we would never, knowingly let those people be involved with us. And we certainly wouldn't seek out a business arrangement with those people. We have no idea the background of many of our donors. That's not really what we check for donation. We accept their donation and say thank you and buy hoffs and pay off hoffs. That's a big hypothetical, but no, we don't start looking for where donated money comes on that. That wouldn't be a responsible thing to do, in my opinion. We have some other questions unrelated, though. I was reading from Caleb. I was reading the book, The Serpent and the Eagle, and I saw there was a reference to Christians wanting the end of the world while European folk religion seeks to postpone it. Do you think this is correct? Do you think this applies at all to the accelerationism? And if so, how? Daniel, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think so. I think there's some merit to that. And by the way, that's a great book. I highly recommend it. But I think there's some merit there. I don't know about accelerating toward, the cataclysmic end of all things that we understand and know. But I do think there's like a certain amount of, it doesn't matter what happens in this life anyway. So, my reward is in heaven. Whereas, European religiosity is always trying to stave off the wolf, trying to stave off that which consumes everything. I think there's a clear distinction to be made there. And I know it wasn't part of the question, but I think that this very concept, this very thought, the universal Abrahamic religion that has swept the globe over the last 1,500 or more years is part of the root cause of our soul sickness.
Yeah, I think it's real fundamental, and something that our founder, Steve McNallen, talked about was how Abrahamic faiths, and honestly with it, a number of Eastern faiths like Hinduism, okay, in my understanding of a lot of forms of Hinduism and Buddhism, and in my understanding, are world rejecting. And Asatru is world life rejecting and life embracing, I think, or world embracing. We're about making the best of the life that we have and using the life in the world, the life we have in the world that surrounds us, as a medium to live our values, to accomplish, to succeed, to build reputation, to do things. So we're not trying to escape some horrible existence for something better. We're trying to make the best out of what we have in this life. And that does become very different. I think it expresses itself differently in the other faiths, but the idea that life is bad, the world is bad, and we need to just endure this horrible slog to get to something better. I do think that idea played out in a lot of ways. I think it gives root to accelerationism. I think we hear accelerationism in terms of politics a lot, and I think that does. I think it builds on one another. Like, I think in a way, there's a number of sects of Christianity that practice a spiritual accelerationism, but not really in that kind of a negative sense, but more they have to accomplish certain things before their end times scenario starts to play out.
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they're really big on the idea that before the new system and before Jesus can come back, that the gospel needs to be preached in all the corners of the world. So that's a big thing that's behind their extensive preaching mission. There's other Christian sects that we've seen throughout time, especially when you get around points where they're expecting the end times. That came around, the millennium. It came around the first millennium. It comes around a number of those dates. But when that starts to happen, you do have certain people that feel like they need to put things in place to hasten that or to hurry up and facilitate their end time scenario. And I think that absolutely plays in. And I think that concept expresses itself politically by some people as well.
I think further to expand on that is that a lot of the concept of this life and the next, when it comes to the Christian idea, is that everything that we do now doesn't matter up until the moment of death. Up until the moment of everything that you did up until that moment where your body stops breathing is erased. Whereas with the Aryan spirituality and Aryan religiosity, we're thinking ahead. We're thinking about generations that follow us. And I think that's a lot of what you see going on in the West is like this idea of, let's just ruin the planet for the sake of profit because we're not going to inherit it anyway. We're going to heaven. And who cares who comes behind us?
That's funny because I see that different now. I see a lot of that is people who are genuinely atheists. And when you find a certain segment of modern nihilistic atheists that don't have children and really have no investment in the future, yeah, they're out to just get whatever they can get, whoever they hurt, be damned. But I think we do see that at different times of not really giving a lot of thought about the damage done to the world around them or future generations because, their salvation is coming and then they don't got to worry about it. And I noticed, again, not in a sinister a way, but in the time that I was with Jehovah's Witnesses, that was a thing. Like they fully expected, they have a thing where their end time scenario started at least this was what they were preaching in the 90s, that it started in 1914 and that some segment of people who were alive then would be alive for, for the second coming, basically. And so I can remember in like 99, 2000, they were having people take out loans they couldn't pay back and make real irresponsible decisions because, hey, they're not going to have to pay it back because Jesus is coming like next week. So, and that was, I think with the distance of time, we can see how that was real erroneous. Nick in Washington donated $50 towards the heat at Thorshoff. Thank you, Nick. Much appreciated.
Appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys have been particularly generous on the Thorshoff heating situation. That's much appreciated and going to go a long way. So thank you guys for that. Must all donors or lenders go through an application process? Would these people demand that we background check an entire bank branch? Probably. And again, I don't necessarily fault whoever's asking on the show tonight. They may not know any better, but I think the people that are stirring the misinformation or the partial information plot on that, sure, they would ask us to do any of those things as long as it could potentially embarrass or damage us, because I think that's really kind of the goal. But no, nobody needs to go through some kind of a vetting process to donate money. That's absurd and counterproductive. Hey there, question for the show tonight. What are some good ways to cultivate faith and piety, particularly in someone who tends to be more inclined towards skepticism due to bad past experiences with other religions? Thanks. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the most direct ways to do that, and let me frame this a little bit in my answer. I can see how someone, came from, some negative experiences in their previous expression of religiosity, or perhaps coming at this from a atheistic standpoint, that they can see our gods as something abstract and something that's intangible, something that can't be touched. And to a degree, they're not incorrect in that, but they're not abstract, and our interactions with them don't work the same way as they would with Christ or Yahweh or whatever. But I think the most tangible way to be able to learn to approach this religion with an overarching piety is our ancestors. I think in the household specifically, that daily ancestor veneration, or at least regular ancestor veneration, should kind of take the forefront. And that's something that's tangible. That's people that you knew. You were looking at the result of their life's effort. They survived, thrived, loved, reproduced. So you look in the mirror every day, and you're looking at the like the pages of a book. It's the story of your ancestral line. It's kind of like I was talking about before, is that even like the seemingly mundane, how we carry ourselves, how we present ourselves, how we interact with others. Does that play out in a way that reflects the values that your ancestors would have held dear? So rather than just seeing the gods as something abstract, I think another way of looking at it is our gods are our eldest ancestors. And we see that in the story of creation. And a lot of the story of creation too is, spoken in metaphors, but there are clues within the metaphors. Odin and his brothers found, 2 trees, Ask and Embla, ash and elm, and they were without soul. They were without root. And then they were given consciousness. They were given breath. They were given spirit. They were given goodly hue. They were given sacrality. And it's telling a story there that when the first man and woman, whether they're allegory or not, it could be the first generation of people of our race, came to be aware of and conscious of the gods, they began to take root. They began to blossom. They began to become who they are, who they were intended to be. So that's how we can kind of tie in with our gods being, specifically Odin and his brothers being our most ancient ancestors. And there's examples of this that play out throughout Eddic lore, and we see that in the Lay of Rig, when again there's metaphors here, somewhat allegories, where it's great grandmother and great grandfather, and I don't see that as two couples. I see that as a generation. They were didn't have a lot of bread. They didn't have much more than just some warm soup to offer Rig, Heimdall in his human form. But what happened was they invited them into their home. They invited the divine into their home. And then the next generation was a little bit further along. Became, much more like the warrior class of our folk. And then that class invited the Aesir, the divine, into their home. And then there was this steady march toward nobility. So anyway, to answer your question in its simplest forms, I think everything begins with ancestor worship, and then that which seemingly is abstract starts to become less and less abstract.
Sorry about that. I was muted there. Yeah, I think there's a variety of right answers to that question depending on the person. And I think Daniel hit on most of them, but his the first point, and I think this is true, especially for somebody starting from atheism or from kind of a clean slate, but skeptical, is just what he said: ancestor veneration. Your ancestors are real. You knew them, probably some of them that you would be venerating. You know factually the other ones of them existed at one time. That positions you a little bit better and a little bit closer to build that relationship and to work on that slowly over time. As far as piety and relationship with the gods, though, this isn't so much a roadmap as kind of a prerequisites to have in mind to facilitate meaningful experience that way. You need to have a certain openness. I think that first, you're not going to fool the gods by pretending that you are more pious than you are, or by claiming a greater level of belief than you have. But I think there's a value in approaching your altar or bloat with others or whatever you're doing, understanding that you're skeptical and you haven't developed the piety yet, but knowing and genuinely meaning that you honestly want to. One of the opening things I'd suggest someone does at their altar is just going there with an open heart, an open mind, and making an offering and saying that, hey, I'm here. I don't know if you exist or not. I don't know if you hear me, but I hope that you do. And if you do, I'm here and I'm listening and I'm open. I think lots done by being open-handed that way and open-hearted and just seeing. But if you're so skeptical when you go in and you don't consciously suspend your skepticism, you make it much, much harder for subtle influences to take hold and for you to really get a meaningful experience. And I think also going in without, part of that openness is not having particular expectation. If you go in demanding, I'm going to make this offering, I'm going to offer up some mead, and then the heavens are going to open and the gods are going to speak to me, and that's a big ask, and that's probably not going to be what happens. So I think going in there without expectation, but just with openness and being hopeful, that goes a long way. but also something that we've talked about tonight quite a bit is building the habit of it.
Yep.
Like anything else, if it's not something that comes natural to you and you're naturally acquainted with, it's something that you need to make a point of doing. You need to make a pattern and a habit of doing. Going before your altar, saying a prayer, making an offering. Do that and give it some time. Give it an honest shot to see what happens. And like I said, I think one of the freeing things for a lot of people is you don't have to be dishonest. You don't have to. Your opening your opening offering isn't complete and total devotion and belief in these gods. No, you can start from where you are. You can admit that you're skeptical, and you can work from there in an honest way. And I think that's the best way to go.
I think too, acknowledging our place in the structure of things. If you hadn't already taken that step, at least you wouldn't even be open, to the idea of worship, the idea of faith. Building that habit where we approach divinity with that open heart is also an act of sacrality and an act of devotion. Even if you haven't established that relationship, you establish that relationship through experience. Be that at your home altar, or be that joining other folk in reverent devotion to the ICR, whether that's through bloat, through somber. And some of these things will begin to look very familiar to you. And I experienced this in 2019, the first event that I ever met Mr. Flavel at. Up to that point, the gods hadn't revealed themselves to me. But whenever I got, when I was in the bloat circle, experiencing that gift cycle in a very powerful and palpable, tangible way. And the light bulb kind of came on. I can't promise that's exactly how it happens for everybody, but it is an increasingly common story. I've discussed this with Mr. Flavel several times. As a Gothi, there are few things more rewarding than seeing that aha moment happen when again, the light bulb kind of comes on and like, whoa, this is real. And that happens with varying degrees of, I don't want to say severity, but I can't think of another word at the moment, but varying degrees of palatable awesomeness. But it does happen if you open yourself up to it. It won't happen if you don't.
Yeah, and that looks different for everybody. Like I said at the outset of the question, there's no one size fits all answer, but I think those things will lead you in the right direction. Tyler in New Hampshire donated $100 towards the Thor's Hoffy. Thank you, Tyler. We appreciate you. Speaking of Jason and no white guilt, what are your thoughts on his go free methods and his use of the terms anti-white and anti-whiteism as a way to combat the injustices happening to our race? Daniel, what are your thoughts on the no white guilt concept and language?
I don't have any thoughts really. I don't follow Jason's stuff. I'm aware of it. But I think that there's certainly some merit in using terminology like anti-white, and let's call things what they are. Again, this truth is one of our virtues. We're talking about virtues that we live our lives by, but I think seeing treachery and calling it out and calling it for what it is another example of right action. I think that's something that should be expected of anybody who's Caucasian and is traditionally minded. We see the world, we see what's going on, and no one on this program is going to tell you to just totally turn a blind eye to it. We got here because of a severance, a severing of that invisible tissue between us and our gods and goddesses. We got here because we accepted universalist poison millennia ago. and that's permeated throughout the West. So what we've been seeing in the world playing out the way it is, whether it's, random people getting killed on train cars and stuff like that, all that is a result because of this idea that we can all live as one, that we accept this doctrine of equality, or we accept this doctrine of your race doesn't even matter. And I was pointing out earlier about the the idea of Christianity, being like a form of universalism that has permeated and affected the soul of, I would say, every man and woman on the earth. Not just our own people, but it's played out a lot in our own bloodlines. I think it was in the book of Galatians where Christ is, or I'm sorry, not Christ, but I believe it was either Peter or Paul. So there will come a point where it won't matter if you're a Jew or if you're a Gentile, that you'll all be, united as, a child of God or a child of Christ. Think about the language behind that. That's literally the erasure of culture, the erasure of ethnic identity, and it's being encouraged in their holy book. So I think using those words like anti-white and calling that out when you see it, I think is expected of our folk.
So I'm not really up on his latest stuff. I think there are things about the no white guilt, go free deal that I like, and I think that being very intentional about the words we use is also really important. So I think that's good insofar as he's trying to reframe the argument by not buying into their words and by utilizing words that he feels are independently meaningful and something that he came up with, instead of falling into like name calling or what their preconceptions of words mean. I think that's really important and something we should all think about more than I think we do. One thing that I hate to put this on Jason because I have no idea if this is something that's directly his doing or just something that I found very, very common with the followers of his that we've interacted with, going around demanding that other grown people use your very, very specific set of terms that you came up with, I don't think has the effect that they want. I think it pushes people away and irritates people and causes a resentment and a backlash. I know that some of the people that I've known that were really involved in that or really interested in that a number of years ago were just completely off-putting socially with their demands that everyone use their special terminology. But I think, being very cautious and rejecting to buy into their existing terminology is real important. So yeah, being cautious of what we say. I think labeling things that are clearly anti-white as anti-white is a legitimate thing to do. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good concepts. It's more with the extreme trying to push those concepts on all the rest of us that I've seen with some of his followers that was kind of disturbing. Other than that, I think the concept's a really good one from what I know of it. Is there a uniform bloat structure for all HOFs currently in use by the AFA, or is it up to each HOF to decide how bloat is offered? Yes, there's a unified bloat structure. I think that certain bloats and certain things, there's room for customization, and different HOFs, I'd say more so than different HOFs, different occasions call for alterations to that structure. But there is a standard bloat structure throughout the Asatru Folk Assembly, and there's also very specific things that make it count as a bloat or not. Beyond those, we do absolutely encourage people to add to that structure or to flesh it out with things that are very specific to the occasion. But there's a basic bloat structure that's held in common throughout the AFA. Lourdes, France has a reputation as a place of healing. Do you think this is accurate? If so, do you think this is Yahweh or a land spirit doing the healing? What are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
That's the first time hearing of that. Without knowing any real detail on it, I would probably ascribe that more to spirit of the land, gods of the folk that live there. Our gods aren't necessarily locked into one geographical area, but our gods certainly, follow their people, or their people follow them, or wherever we are, they are. It very well could be that acts of sacrality have been occurring there for millennia, and that energy is palpable and it can pass on from generation to generation. And perhaps that is a place where people have flocked to for as long as there have been people in that area for ritual healing.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So yes, I think that, most of these mystical places, I don't suggest that nothing happens. And I'll extend that. I think that places of a lot of different religions, pilgrimages where they claim to have miraculous healing, or they claim to have any number of blessings there. I'm not out to suggest those things don't exist or don't happen. The legitimacy of Asatru is not built on other religions being illegitimate. Now, a certain animosity towards Abrahamism is inherent because the premise of that religion is to deny the divinity of our gods and to very punitively go against the practice of our faith. So we have to have a certain stance towards that in a general way, at least towards those doctrines. But I'm not saying that there's no healing that goes on there. That could very well be those saints from beyond the veil having the ability to affect their worshipers. Could very well be land spirits. We don't preclude that there's other spiritual forces in the world that aren't our gods. But yeah, I don't think we need to disprove or invalidate that. And I think it would kind of be foolish to do so. Those things are well attested that something special does happen there. And like I said, there are lots of spiritual powers at play in the world around us and in the realms beyond our sight.
I think a good modern example that we could see play out like through the lens of Asatru is if you haven't ever been to Odenshof in California. So that Hof was open in 2015, and there had been ritual action taking place there at least on a monthly basis, probably more, for the last over a decade now. And I would bet you the minute that you set foot on that property, that the energy there is palpable. It just feels different. And I do think certain places get imbued with that kind of energy through the acts of sacred ritual action that occur there on a regular basis. Now, and again, I'm not proposing that's the case with this place in France, but I'd be willing to bet you it probably has something to do with that, because if you look at like where stave churches and stuff are now, like in Norway, those places were intentionally placed there. There was at least at one time a place sacred to the pre-Christian civilization that lived there, and they would wipe it out, plant a church there.
And I think that all of those things factor in. Again, like I say, the efficacy of Asatru doesn't depend on other faiths being ineffective or not being real. This is just the right faith for our folk. Another question, and this is an odd question. It's a good rhetorical, but I don't know where we go as an answer, but I'll go ahead and throw it to you first, Daniel. If our folk were judged not by what we say we believe, but by our daily actions, what would the gods see?
It's interesting you should ask that, because that's quite literally the premise of my talk today. That words are just wind without action, right? That's where the Hoff motto, "Words are wind, deeds are iron," comes from. If we preach strength, but we live in a way that's sluggardly, well, what we said don't really mean much. Or if we preach frith, but we tolerate gossip, our actions don't match our words. So I think that's the best way to look at this. And I think we could quite literally close the conversation on that very question. If our words say one thing, but our deeds say another, how would our ancestors judge us? And that should be a daily question for the individual, for us as a collective.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Like, there's no answer to that question, because with the individual, any specific answer, would vary with the individual. But that's one thing that I make a point of whenever I'm giving gloat, is I invite the gods, the ancestors, and the Landvitir to hear us, to know us, to hear our words, and to judge our deeds. And I invite that. I don't, as I said earlier, we're not going to fool the gods. I think that it is certainly disrespectful to think that we could, but it's of such a scale that it's almost comical to think that we could. We can't fool the gods. The gods know better. I think that we are, and again, the gods can judge us however they like by whatever metric they choose to use. But I have to believe that it's better to be honest and to actually be the people we say we are than to knowingly be dishonest about the people we claim to be and then not have the actions to back up those claims. I also think that something we all know is it's way easier to say a thing or to claim a hypothetical or to claim to believe something than to act in a way in the real world where there is consequence that demonstrates the seriousness of the thing you say. It's always much harder in real life. And I think the gods see that and know that. So, yeah, gods are watching and the ancestors are watching. So,
and just as importantly, our children are watching.
Yes. And
we're all at various stages in that continual process. If anyone were to profess to you that they are at the end stages of that process of becoming that complete version of themselves, through piety, through doing the right thing every single time, no matter what, if they tell you that they are done with that, they are lying to you, and those are charlatans, because that is an ongoing, lifelong process.
So you mentioned something earlier, and to harken back to it, you talked about the people that, chest thump about how they wouldn't kneel before the gods.
Right.
This is one of those things. Yeah, you would. Like, if one of our real existent gods manifested before you and you were in his presence, you wouldn't take a knee. You think that you would stand toe to toe with a god? I don't think you genuinely think that if you actually believe in the gods. I think you say that if you're trying to impress your homies at the bar or whatever you're doing, but that doesn't wash out with somebody who genuinely believes in the gods. A lot of the flakiness that we so often see, a lot of those people wouldn't act that way if they had a sincere belief in the gods. And again, don't pretend that you have a belief in the gods if you don't, but know where you are, know who you are, know where you're starting from, and be honest. Be honest with yourself, with those around you, and with the gods. And if you're honest and you're open and willing to work on yourself, there's room for improvements. If you can't be honest with yourself, then you don't have the opportunity to grow and to seize chances for growth because you're busy, trying to live a fantasy. So it's real different when actions come into play. That's why in Asatru, it's always been such an important refrain that we are our deeds.
I think too that, and again, I don't mean to go off on a tangent, Mr. Flavel, but I think there are certain ways that have been commonly. There's certain ways people have commonly viewed our gods, specifically in modern Asatru. Some, as Matt, just said, that they, view it as something abstract, something that's not real and tangible. And then you have another sect of people that like to view this specifically through a historical lens. That's still not the same as believing in the existence of real gods. That if it specifically is, if a god is just a character in your history book, that's not really a god. That's just a character. But I instead of just freezing them in a particular time in a specific space and only viewing them through that one lens, I think is I don't think it's intentional impiety, but it's still impiety. Our gods are real. They are living. They exist now. They're not just locked in a place in the past. They're not just locked in that book that you read.
Indeed. Are there any particular rules to how an Asatru altar should be set up? Should the altar be facing a certain direction? Should there be a main statue of Odin? No, there are no. Yes, it should be pious and respectful. Outside of it being respectful and pious, there's no specific orientation or specific rules to it. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but Daniel, do you have any insights in Asatru altar setup?
All the things you just said, but I think setup with intention also matters. If having them face to the north means something to you, or have it where it's oriented where you're facing to the north, that if that adds meaning to you, then do it that way. But I think doing so in a devotional and reverent way is chief among what the requirements are. Some people use incense. Some people use candles. All of those things are not wrong answers. But doing so in a way that's like meaningful and with intention, I think that matters more than anything else.
Yes, intentionality is everything. So I know that traditionally a lot of people will try to orient them to where they're facing north. Again, it depends on why you're doing that. I think originally that was done to reference that we are a northern, we are a polar tradition coming out of the pole. Some people orient north as a reference to staying true, being oriented towards the pole star. There are other people that will orient an altar. If you're specifically erecting an altar for Austra that's coming up, the goddess of the east, the dawn. Maybe you orient it to the east and to the sunrise. I know that at funerals, often it will be facing the west and the setting sun. That's how we orient gravestones in the Asatru folk assemblies. We typically orient those to where when you're facing the stone, you're facing the setting sun. The intention behind it matters a lot. So everybody's altar is pretty unique on the things that they put on it. Very often you have statues or idols of the gods. Sometimes people have those like little framed pictures. Other times they're little statues. Candles are often there. A spot to burn incense, something to make, a drink offering to pour out mead or a shot or whatever else. I think those are also very common to have there. Depends whether you do your ancestor veneration at the same place you venerate the gods. If so, pictures of your ancestors or maybe heirlooms and things that remind you of your ancestors are also good things to put there. But there's a whole lot of right ways to do that, and that's going to have to do with you, the intention of why you're doing the things you're doing, and also, just kind of the setup of your house and what the logistics are of the spot that you choose. Question. I see all these attacks and you are very transparent in your removal of degenerate individuals. What was the nature of the reason you removed the person who funded the down payment on your Toph? Why was he removed? So just a couple of clarifications. He wasn't removed. He was never a member. There was a guy that loaned us the initial money to make the payment on the Hoff, and then we repaid that loan. But he was denied membership altogether because he was a homosexual. I say was, he still is as far as I know. I noticed almost all the folkish Asatru organizations and circles seem to hate the AFA and make accusations against the AFA. Why do you think that is? Jealousy because the AFA is successful? Daniel, go ahead and take a swing at that first.
Yes. I've heard some ridiculous things in my time, not only as a member of the AFA, but my time as leadership. Like Matt's a Fed. Why? Because he combs his hair and wears a tie. Anything successful has to be something nefarious to some of these people. And this is an example of that soul sickness, that success is viewed as something negative, and it's something to be jealous or envious of. And there's a healthy jealousy, there's a healthy envy, but this type of jealousy and envy is just unhealthy. And I think it's a clear-cut example of the kind of thing that we're talking about when we're addressing soul sickness. Anything successful has to be nefarious.
Yeah, there's a couple things. There's this. I think we get multiple doses of it. I think amongst quote unquote paganism, there's a big crab in the bucket effect. And I think in, white positive or racially aware white people space, there's also a tremendous amount of crab in the bucketism. There is so much failure that people are used to, and so much trauma, I think, that they're used to by being let down, that anything that succeeds or any amount of success is immediately must be nefarious, must be a scam, must be something. And I think there is a very strong drive by often very damaged people to consistently pull everyone back down to their level so that nobody's able to succeed. And I do think that's what a lot of it's about. One of the other things that I think is a big point is in the world of folkish Asatru, anything that was originally parallel to the AFA in some way, like had their own origin, their own independent existence, those things either merged with the AFA over time or fell by the wayside. So in the world of folkish Asatru now, you almost exclusively have people who are, disgruntled former members. And they get very upset when they see the AFA is continuously successful and they're not. Something else I've noticed is a lot of those people, when they leave or they get angry or whatever their deal is, they immediately think, and again, starting the day they decide to quit, because up till then, they'll be big supporters of the AFA. But once they've decided that they need to quit for whatever reason, or if they were to get removed, which happens so rarely, all of a sudden they build up a bunch of grievances as to why the AFA is doing it wrong and how, they could all do it so much better. And we don't really see that play out. And I think it does. I do think there's a lot of jealousy there. The other thing that I think's in play is the AFA are the ones doing things. So they become like a class of critics to where their focus and the easy thing for them to have something to discuss is to criticize what the AFA is doing as opposed to come up with their own projects and their own things to do. And in doing so, I think that they realize there's not a lot, like we are in some of the same circles. So in order for them to grow, if they don't know how to get new people, then their only way to grow is if they can break off people from the AFA. They can spook them by, talking about things that are embarrassing or scary or whatever to make them leave the AFA. And then maybe, the hope is that they'll join these other smaller groups. And that's unfortunate because all that holds us back and all that, chips away at momentum towards successful things for our gods and our folk.
And we can't win if we keep breaking ourselves down into smaller and smaller groups.
I mean, we can, but it takes a whole lot longer and it's a whole lot harder. If all the people that were former members were truly honest about why they're former members, I think a lot of them would come back. And I think that if that happened and everybody who really should come back to the AFA did, I think we'd be so much stronger and we could do really good things together. And I hope that folks that suffer from the soul sickness can find that healing and do that. It's always really special when people come back, and they do a lot actually recently. So it's a nice thing.
Myself being one of them. Again, we were talking earlier about, the many being the memory and the Huger being the rational mind. Another example of that soul sickness is irrational thinking. I hear this thing I don't like. Well, you know what? We're just done. And if you were to ask me why I quit, as a matter of fact, I called Mr. Flavel when I decided I wanted to come back, and we were only gone for 6-8 weeks, something like that. Called Mr. Flavel at home, and this man didn't know me, and asked him if it was okay if I came back. He graciously and obviously let me come back. Daniel, what was the problem? I didn't even remember. It was something that dumb, apparently. And to this day, I still don't remember what it was. Some guy said that this guy said that, and blah. Instead of going to the source and trying to figure out whatever the grievance was, I just reacted. And again, a flaw of my own that I've since worked on. I'm not saying I'm perfect about it now, but I think a lot of people just react. And they don't take time to go through these thought processes in order to try to get to the source of the problem. And Matt, I'm sorry if I'm hijacking. I don't mean to.
You are our special guest. You are the specialist of guests. You do whatever you want. We're good.
Thank you, sir. I think a lot of these things too stem down to this is going to sound really dumb, but it just is what it is. It's this not just reactionary stuff, but a lot of times the grievances will build up out of politeness. How many times have we seen that, Mr. Matt? Or, you know what? I'm just gonna be super polite about it, and I'm not even gonna worry about it. And these things start to
a
build.
lot, and it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned so a lot, and that is kind of the origin story of this very show. Was people would get stirred up over whatever perceived grievance they'd have, but they were too polite to address it or too polite to ask a question. So instead they would, get mad and blow up or rage quit over something. Often that was just a misunderstanding that they wouldn't ask a question about. So it's like, it's not comfortable when people ask some of these questions. But it is always very much encouraged. And the reason I started doing this show is I want people to, ask the genuine questions they have. I can accept if we end up disagreeing, but it's much harder to accept when I know that it would have worked out real different if we would have talked about it, or somebody would have just asked the question and maybe got some insight into why things were the way they are.
Right. And I think out of that abundance of politeness, and maybe not just including that, but people will have a conversation in their own head. Mm-hmm. I heard Matt said this thing, and I'm going to confront him about it, and I know what he's going to say back to me, and I'm going to come back with this, and all of a sudden you've got this fight happening in your own head, and it could be just as simple as, no, that's not what happened. Oh, okay. I've had those same conversations with this man multiple times. Matt, tell me about this or that. And before I could react, and again, building up a narrative in my head and reacting out of, impulse and all that, we just, like two adult men had a conversation, and don't always like the explanation. I don't think that's a requirement, but I think at least accepting and understanding it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I continue to encourage questions here. Absolutely. Joe in Ohio donated $10 towards folk services. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
And Tyler in New Hampshire again donated an additional $100, this time to folk services. Thank you, Tyler. We appreciate you. Smooth Tyler. I saw the documentary made about your organization in Murdoch that went viral. Does that Murdoch area against hate group still harass your members? No, matter of fact, it doesn't. It's funny. The lady who initially did a lot of the reporting there was quoted as saying, I've gotten a lot of people worked up about this. So we had a reporter going around actively trying to stir people up. And, there was this Murdoch Alliance Against Hate developed or whatever. And I never really saw a lot of that materialize. I think there was a photo op with a small handful of people at one point. But no, one of the founders of that group came by, as a matter of fact, and apologized to us and said, they believed the hype and that we're great people and they were ashamed that that was something that they were a part of. The community there has been awesome. They regularly will, make donations of supplies and things to us. They'll leave nice little notes about what a blessing we are to have in the community. Community members will come by and have coffee and meet with us there. It's been really nice, and I would say it's been nice, especially in Murdoch, as far as the local community members go on that. Yeah, so that's really not a thing. We actually had it was the sweetest protest in the world. So we had this thing. I got an email from someone, and this is a female that said, hey, I just want to let you know that I'm coming out there this weekend to protest you guys, but I'm nonviolent and I don't wish you guys any harm. And I'm not trying to hurt anybody, but I want to go protest there. I'm just letting you know. And, I'll be there with my class. So I assumed this was a college thing. I assumed whatever. When I asked, like, your class, yeah, it was her high school class. And, it was cold. And I said, all right, well, if you guys get cold, come on inside. We'll get you some hot chocolate. We'll warm you guys up and you can go back out. And it was, we really haven't had a problem in that community outside of, the initial reporter trying to stir up issues. Honestly, that piece that you mentioned by the Guardian, that's may have been the single biggest recruitment tool for the AFA that we've had so far. We've gotten many, many members from that. So that worked out very well for us in the end.
Yes, it did.
That's an interesting question. Can someone be devout in ritual but lacking in right action? What does that mean for their piety? Daniel.
Short answer is yes. Again, it's our actions that count, and it's not just our actions in the ritual space. It's not just our actions in a sacred enclosure. It's our daily stuff. Does that mean that somebody is not devout during ritual? No. But it also means they're not carrying that home with them. They're not carrying that flame of nobility and piety home with them. And that looks different from person to person. And again, assuming that people are at various stages of the process, are regularly attending bloats. We see this a lot. Some guys and girls show up thinking that it's, something that it's not. This is a place to party, and it's a place to bitch about everything that's wrong in the world, and we're going to go hail Thor. Not really. We are just here to give worship and exchange gifts with our gods, and also fellowship together. And again, look, I can use myself as an example. I was the guy that showed up at that first Austria where I met Mr. Flavel. I'm wearing like a Slayer shirt and some jeans, and I saw how all the folks were dressed, and I was, wow, I need to do something about this. And Heather and I split and went to Walmart and went and grabbed a shirt and a tie and stuff like that. So these things become contagious, and a lot of times they don't have to be said, they don't have to be spoken. No one told me to go change my clothes. And again, it's a small example. I'm not suggesting that if you just change your clothes, then you're pious. It's not what I mean. But it's an example of, treating this with the seriousness that it deserves. And again, that wasn't done like Matt didn't pull me to the side, or Spawn didn't pull me to the side and tell me I need to go, get myself cleaned up or whatever. The influence of the social situation and the seriousness with which the proceedings were taken, that rubs off. But short answer to your question is that you can show up and be devoted and still go home and be impious. Yes, that is possible. But I think learning how to carry that flame of piety and dignity home with you, and applying it in your everyday life, I think is what matters.
So specifically lacking in right action was the prerequisite.
Okay, I apologize.
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, I think that all of us are this to varying degrees, because we can all do righter with our action. I think one of the things to keep in mind, though, is yes, you can have somebody, and this is a beautiful place to start. It's just not where you should finish. But yeah, you can have a lot of people that are extremely pious. They show up and they practice, overt religiosity like bloat and ritual very piously, but they still don't have their life right. And we
Yep.
see these people a lot, and this isn't a steady state of that person. It's very often, seasons in people's lives. We have people that suffer from addiction. I think all of us suffer to some degree from our soul sickness. And we have people that, come through and maybe they'll be super pious and they are very genuine in their devotion to the gods, but they don't know how to maintain their personal life or to break their addiction or to act right. And the hope is that through continued piety, you can build the strength of character and engender the good graces of the gods and ancestors to help you work through that. And also, the more time you're around your folk and the more you genuinely take part in your faith community in the AFA, you have people that can help you through those parts of your life. You can have people that kind of can hold your hand through some of those hard times and help lift you up and get you to a better spot. So you certainly can be pious and also not be acting right. But at some point, genuine piety ought to lead you to making those changes in your life.
That's what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the idea of alignment. This holistic view of being piety. Of being pious. Mr. Flavel can account for this too. That a lot of our duties as clergy and at varying stages of our time as clergy, we spend a lot of time counseling members, and through that counsel and through that mentorship that we are providing people is with that goal in mind, is to get that alignment. Take what we do home and apply it in our day-to-day lives. And when we're talking about like right action, it can be just as simple as just doing the right thing. Your mom doesn't have enough food in the cupboard. Go put some food in her cupboard. That's doing the right thing. That's being, an honorable and right oriented person. It could be something just that simple. It could be as simple as, helping a young man tie his first tie. It's just doing the right thing in the right moment at the right time with the right intention. I think is really the overarching thing. How many of you have seen a starving animal on a street corner and pulled over and poured out some water and thrown out some food for that animal? That's, again, it's not the same thing as when we're talking about these grand ideas, but that is a simple act of right action. That's just doing the right thing. It's just being a good human being.
Yeah, so I think that's real important because it's, one of the themes tonight, and it's the reason we use the Rhytho rune to advertise tonight, and it's the rune of our Gothar, is to be consciously aware of right action at the right time, moving us forward. Like Daniel mentioned, with so many things, there are big sweeping things. And yes, in the moment of crisis, we want to do the big, heroic, super right action. But living a life of right action is built on the collection of all the small things.
Yep.
So, it's something as simple as, picking up trash if you walk by, especially you're at a Hoff, you walk by and there's trash on the ground somewhere, pick it up. You see ladies lifting and carrying stuff, go take it from them and help them out, help them carry something somewhere. You're on a bus or on the subway or something, and you're sitting down and some lady comes in, doesn't have a place to sit, offer her your seat. Do those things. Hold a door open. Say sir, say ma'am. Be polite. Do simple things. Take the opportunity when somebody asks you about your hammer, instead of blowing them off because you're in a hurry, stop and have a little conversation about Asatru. It's a collection of all those things that gets you in sync to where when the big things come, you're primed, you're ready. Those muscles of right action are, trained to where you're ready for the big right action that you need when those come about.
So I gave a sermon on this topic at Thorshof. It was back at specifically it was during Ein Herjablot, and the whole purpose of us celebrating the Ein Herjar is us celebrating heroes. And heroic action is often done in a flash. It's the guy, it's the soldier on the battlefield that dives on the grenade to take the impact to save his brothers. A regular run-of-the-mill guy might say he would do those things, but sits on the couch and watches football and binge watches Netflix and does nothing right with his life. Not necessarily through the inaction of wrong. I just don't do wrong things, but I'm just sitting on the couch and vegging out. That guy will never be in a position to take heroic action because he hasn't built the foundation in his life that creates right action. So that flash decision is second nature and it becomes an instinct. The guy that shields his children from an attacker and sacrifices himself, or the guy that protects his family from a wild animal or whatever by offering himself up instead. If he didn't live a life of courage or of right action, or at least have the mindset of living in the right way, he'd never be in that situation to begin with. He'd tuck tail and run.
All right. I've heard the Aesir versus Vanir. In Hinduism, Vedanta is the Deva versus Asuras. I think Asura, Aesir are etymologically related. Is Hinduism a myth inversion? I find parallels to concepts like karma and minya. Daniel, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not an expert on Vedic Hinduism, but I do know it has its roots in the Aryan religiosity. So you'll often see those parallels and overlaps throughout the course of Aryan history, whether it's through the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European religion that we've read about quite extensively, that shows up in Vedic Hinduism, and it also shows up in Asatru. So are those things etymologically the same? I don't know because I have not looked into it. But I now that you brought it up, I will certainly look into that whenever we're done here. So I find that kind of stuff fascinating.
Yeah, I've always been kind of curious about that, and even more so when it comes to Zoroastrianism, because it flips things around. When you look at cognate gods as close as we can figure out in how they play out in Hinduism or not, I think who's in which of those camp looks a little bit different, but I think it starts to take on a good guy versus bad guy form much different than it does in our lore. The most ancient beginnings of Hinduism come from a shared ancient Aryan origin. They've developed radically different as the people have become less and less us in the Indian subcontinent there, and as just time and space have separated us. So I do think that there's some inversion going on there. I'm not sure that Ashura and Aesir have an etymological connection. I'd like to look it up. I understand that Ashura means like not Shura. And Aesir the reason it's got the A like beginning is more of an integral part of the word as opposed to like a prefix. So it's hard because you want to look and find exact parallels in the East, and they're very hard to find there. But there are definitely points of relation that I think we can see, and I think, you know, Hamingya and karma, as you mentioned, is one example of things that have quite a bit of overlap. Are all your Hoffs eventually going to have statues of the McNallans, or is it exclusively for Thorshoff? So those statues are actually at Sigerheim, and they're, you know, on the property that's going to have Tiershoff. I think it'd be awesome if eventually all our Hoffs had statues of McNallans, but that's not a plan in the works. These are our only two statues at this point. Shannon donated $10 to VNS and $10 to Phrasehoff. Thank you, Shannon. Head West asks, what is your response to Michael Sessom's on pagan revivalism saying atonement is due for falling asleep on guard duty? I'm not really sure what atonement that Mike and those guys fairly think is due. I am really sorry that almost 5 years ago now, there was a guy who shouldn't have been let in, and he slipped through the cracks. And we were trying to look into his past criminal convictions and didn't get back around to it, and he slept through, or he snuck through. And when it was brought to our attention, the moment it was brought to our attention and we were showed that was the case, we immediately got rid of the guy. I really wish I could go back in time and not have had the guy slip through. To my knowledge, he didn't hurt anyone within the AFA or do anything in his time with us that damaged anyone. I'm real sorry. I wish there was something I could do to make certain people feel better about it. I'm not really sure what atonement that he wants other than my personal destruction and the AFA's destruction. And I think that's kind of absurd and a whole lot of overkill. I hope that our gods and ancestors don't share his opinion. I don't believe that they do. If they do, I suppose they'll let me know, but I'm not really sure what kind of fair atonement he makes sense or, thinks makes sense in this scenario, other than to immediately burn down any of those things that he doesn't like, including me. I know he's working real hard to try to consistently damage the AFA and my reputation. I've never tried to be dishonest or lie to anybody about any of these things or cover anything up. I'll answer any question anybody has about any of these things. And I suppose that y'all can make the decision on whether you'd like to be part of the Asatru Folk Assembly or not. Other than that, not really sure what the fair demand is, or seems at this point like that's just a way to stir strife and cause problems amongst Asatru and potential Asatru to for whatever nefarious means might be there, but I don't think it's genuine.
So I'm glad that you answered that question before I did, because I had some not kind things to say about Mike Sessoms, but I'll say this. Yes, all the things Matt just said. But this is a good example of us learning from a mistake. Matt, how often do we run criminal background checks on our membership?
Minimum of once a year. We were running them there twice a year till we got, the swing of how to do that efficiently.
How many registered sex offenders have been found since that process began?
In the first week of it, we found one that was immediately removed. Since then, we've found 0.
I don't know what else more we can do. I can't think of anything we can do right now to fix that whole situation for the people that have been detractors and want to continue to slander our name based on that particular mistake.
That's
But
the thing.
can't do anything about what happened, but we've got control over what happens now going forward.
Best we can do when a problem arises is acknowledge it, figure out, what we could have, should have, would have done different, and then implement those things as soon as we can. Again, as soon as the guy was brought to our attention, we got rid of him immediately. And we implemented a plan starting like that week to check every single one to make sure there was no additional problems, and to handle it regularly, just in case something, just in case somebody does something we don't know about in the time that they're a member. All we can do is our best. I know that it falls short to say that, hey, we're not perfect, or hey, that I'm not perfect. I'm not. Mistakes happen. I'm really sorry that this particular mistake happened. I'm very thankful that he didn't harm anybody in the AFA or during his time in the AFA. But yeah, I wish I could go back in time and, him not have slipped through the cracks. I'm sorry that he did. But that's what we can do. That's the only thing that makes sense. And I think the continued cry for atonement I don't think it's well-intentioned, and I don't think it's honest. Is there a way to volunteer for volunteer work during a HOF work weekend? Yes, do that. Volunteer to help out at HOF work weekends. That means really different things at each HOF. There's a lot of different kinds of things that need to be done in a variety of different ways. The AFA's always got a lot of volunteer opportunities. For a long time, they were very distance oriented or computer based or whatever. Now that we have HOFs, now that we have 5 HOFs and the property here that Tiers HOF will go on, there are a lot of different things that need to be done, both, all those things that we needed to do digitally beforehand, but now also all the property maintenance and upkeep, as well as, countless other things. So yes, ask your folk builder, ask folks at the HOF. There's always room for volunteerism, and we deeply appreciate it when you guys step up to help out. That
spirit of volunteerism is the very foundation upon which all of this is built. None of this happens without that spirit of volunteerism. If you're ever in North Carolina, I've got some stuff for you to do at Thorshoff. The work is underway right this minute at Thorshoff.
What else do you have that you would like to tell us about tonight's topic, or anything else while we have you here?
We kind of just touched on it. A very practical application of the concept of right action, is just what we just talked about, that spirit of volunteerism. We've had more than a dozen men and ladies show up at Thorshoff over the last month or so to sand and prime and begin the painting process of Thor's glorious temple in Linden, North Carolina. That's an example of right action. And that's the kind of stuff that means something. It's tangible. It gets us somewhere. It isn't just speaking a belief into existence. It's, the belief playing out through your deeds. Very often we hear that, I do this thing that is sacred and this thing that is mundane. And I think the lines between those things can be blurred. The 6.5 hour drive from Central Tennessee to Eastern North Carolina to attend a bloat at the Hoff, that's an act of sacrifice. That's a sacrifice of your time, of your money, of your comfort. I mean, you could just stay at home, but instead, you decide to hop in the vehicle and make that trek. You refer to that as bloat fury. That in itself is an act of sacrality. Showing up at the Hoff and volunteering to help out with the food pantry or volunteering to help clean up after the event. Those are all acts of devotion. And it isn't always about, that which you can't see playing out. Sometimes these things play out in ways that you can see. Your mother may look at you and say, wow, there's something different about you. What is it? And it could be just in the way that you present yourself, the way you carry yourself, the language that you speak. All of that's a reflection of that pious mind, of that right action that starts within. It isn't always something grand. But we talked a little bit earlier in the conversation about, stacking these little things up and then they become, and it has potential to become something grand. One of the things that I found that was very apparent during my initial joining of the Asatru Folk Assembly was how many successful people that I was surrounded by and continue to be surrounded by. And success varies in the way that it presents. What one person is successful at is not the same as what the next guy is. You spend any amount of time around Mr. Flavel, he's a big, strong guy. Wasn't always that way, but he worked toward it. That's the element of success. The folk builder that onboarded me in 2018, lived in a very, very nice place and financially a successful guy. And I remember thinking, like, not in an envious way, like I don't want him to have this because I don't. I just kept thinking to myself, man, I want a piece of that. And one little step leads to another, and one word leads to another, one deed leads to another deed, and wonderful, bountiful things happen in the process. And if we live our life through our noble virtues and through that lens, instead of a list of don'ts, thou shalt nots, you will arrive eventually at that 10th noble virtue, and that virtue is victory. If every step we take is oriented toward that singular goal of winning, then it's contagious. The next guy sees you win, I want some of that. And that is how we all win, is by sharing in those victories. Because, again, we don't see these things as abstract concepts. If I'm successful, that success is carried over into Mr. Matt, is carried over into Trent, is carried into Svan, Alan, so on and so forth. So our own victories are not just our own, they're the victories of our folk. Those victories are for our gods, and those victories are for our children. Now, I know gods can be abstract concepts. Ancestors are not, and our children are darn sure not. And if you can't do better for yourself for them, I'm not sure we can help you. So win for each other, win for our gods, win for your forebears, and win for your children, our children, the future of our race.
Quick question. What was the reasoning behind picking Jackson County, Tennessee, Fort Sigerheim? There's a variety of things that went into that. As with any of the properties we've gotten, there's kind of a journey there that involves prayer and, deep thought on stuff and meditation. Tennessee is advantageous for a variety of reasons. I think it's appealing to a lot of us because it's in the South, and I think there's a lot of us have history in the South and tradition and values that harken back to that history. So I think that makes it appealing for a lot of us. Tennessee doesn't have the state income tax, which makes it economically advantageous for a lot of our folk. It tends to be a state, and political shifts in states can happen. You can flip red states blue. These things happen. But Tennessee seems pretty solidly with more traditional values than a great deal of other states, which is a nice thing for local laws and local rules that way. Other thing is, it is very central to the AFA operations. There was a time where the center of gravity of AFA membership and AFA activity was all, Northern California, and it's very much not the case now. There's still tons of activity in Northern California, but the significant majority of AFA members are east of the Mississippi. And Sigerheim is exactly within the realm of 5 minutes different, 7 hours and 50x minutes to, at the time, between Thorshof and Njordshof, and also where we were looking and where we ended up getting Freyshof. So it's just about within 5 minute margin of error, exactly the same travel time between all three of those hofs, which makes it a really good spot for the AFA capital in the center of the AFA. I think that there was a lot of things for Tennessee, for Jackson County in specific. Well, okay, another thing about the location. It's in the South, but it's not in the most gnarly all the time humid part of the South. It's still very humid, but it also has topography. It's got hills and ridges and texture to the land, which is important for many of us. And looking at Tennessee as a state, we were looking at where we could find properties that met our needs, where we could find the space, where we got the best deal, and just kind of where it all worked out. And Daniel was actually part of that on scouting some properties for us. And he was the guy that went out and scouted and decided on this Sigerheim property for us. So that all worked out really well, and we're pretty happy with it. Do you have anything to add on your scouting of the property or things of that nature?
Yeah. So we had gone up. I believe we found that property on our second or third trip up there, and we went up there with a couple other properties in mind. Matt had us looking at minimum of 8 properties were on the list. I think it may have been more than that, and it kind of began with that particular area of Jackson County was one of the places that was really appealing, and did what you do whenever you're looking for stuff. You Google realtors, and I had one realtor call me back, and she pointed us toward that particular property that exists there on Hunting Creek now. And we had taken a look at some other properties that just didn't fit. I didn't think fit our needs. Some of it was like the topography was so extreme, like we'd have to dynamite our way into it to just cut a driveway in, and things like that. It just didn't make sense. But the minute that Heather and I pulled up to the property that would eventually become the Sigerheim property, we knew when we pulled in that was the one. It was kind of there's 2 large fields down at the very base of the property. There's a nice ridge that runs along the back side of the property, and we circumvented that entire place, and it's just under 70 acres. And a few things sold me on, besides just like the practicality of the property itself, but just the layout of the area. Had that really like small town, like mountain town feel to it. There's a couple of handful of restaurants, no major shopping area, the shopping center, which I know is decidedly inconvenient. I think it's 45 minutes to the nearest Walmart or something like that. But it checked a lot of boxes, and I don't think out of all the stuff that I have done for the Asatru Folk Assembly, nothing made me as nervous as that process did. Matt said, "Here's X amount of dollars, go find some property." And we pulled the trigger on that property and I'm the only person at the time that ever set foot on it from the AFA. So it was a gamble on my part, but I'm glad it paid off.
Me too.
I love that place. Absolutely love it.
But also, you take into account something like for the folks moving to the county to have Sigerheim in their backyard. We can live anywhere in the county and still be part of the county. So you don't have to be 45, 50 minutes from Cookeville. You can literally be 20 minutes, 25, if that's important to you for work or you just don't like rural life. You can be basically.
What's really interesting is that, we've held Sigur Bloat there the last, this will be the fourth year. Some of the most powerful bloats I've been a part of have been at that place. There's something really awe-inspiring about, being there in person and seeing the statues of our founders, the McNallans, the way that your voice carries in that valley. Even when it was like hot and sticky and all of that, it's just kind of like you endure that because it's just so worth being there. We've camped on that property. Myself, Nick Rice, local members, other folk builders have put a lot of like actual sweat equity into that place. And if I'm remembered for one thing, I hope it's something greater than Sigerheim. But if it turns out that that's what I'm remembered for, I'd feel very accomplished as a Gothi.
Yeah, it's a very special place, and I hope everybody gets a chance to see it. I noticed people in the chat room are excited about the idea of it. Get out here, let's make it happen. I'm excited that I am sitting, 20 minutes from it right now. So, this is an exciting time. We've got a lot of people very interested in moving out and getting in the area. Something that Nick pointed out that I think is really worthwhile to remember. Yeah, getting in the county is the dream. You're in the county. There's no place in the county that's more than 30 minutes from it. You're part of everything if you're in the county. And you can be in the suburbs of Cookeville and be in the county and be right next to, a good-sized little city there with, anything you could need if that's what you want. If you want small towns, there's a number of small towns in Jackson County, Gainesboro being where I'm at, and the small town in Jackson County that's closest, but also tons of rural property, tons of hunting properties that you can, build a home on and live on. If you're looking to, raise livestock or farm or do any number of things, you've got the opportunity to do pretty much whatever you want here in the county. It's got all of the benefits of being rural, but being close enough to cities and stuff that you need. It's really ideal. And we would encourage y'all to get out here.
And if you're an outdoorsy kind of person, it's perfect. There's bodies of water. There's plenty of places to hike, to hunt. I mean, we've seen. The first thing I saw whenever we walked onto the fields was whitetails bouncing through the fields, and love that place.
Wild turkey out there. We've got the Cumberland River runs right through the county. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, beautiful country out here. So,
It is.
another question: how does one rid themselves of their self-hatred that was imposed on them through Christianity? Daniel.
It's a short question, but answers are big and consequential. So if this person were to call me and ask for my spiritual counsel, the first thing that we would have to find out is why. Why do we hate ourselves? And kind of attack it from that root. And getting down to the root of that problem and trying to do some repair there will permeate throughout the rest of the person's life. And we had talked earlier about trying to find like where it was that the soul sickness as we know it now kind of began, and we can trace a lot of that, almost all of that, back to the the breaking of truth that occurred in our distant past. Somebody in every one of our bloodlines was part of that. And I think us, being in the condition that we're in now as a folk and a society, all of that can be traced back to that. So to answer the question, though, we'd have to find out why and what do we hate about ourselves and try to attack that. And if this person were to call me, I'm not going to fill you up with fluffy bunny stuff. I'm not going to blow smoke or whatever. We'll get right to the meat and taters of it. Why do we hate ourselves? Why are we enduring the self-hatred and trying to repair that? And try to build ourselves into something worthy and build ourselves into something to be admired, and to build a house that people want to feel comfortable in, to be a man that people feel good standing next to in circle, or a woman.
Yeah, the answer really depends on how that self-hatred took shape in you. I think the biggest thing to try to overcome is the overall concept of we don't celebrate worthlessness. Like all of the part in Christianity where that man is saved not by faith and not by works, that none might boast, and all of the Beatitudes about basically blessed are the losers. In Asatru, that's not the case. Blessed are the heroes, and we are elevated through works that we might be able to boast and that our gods might be proud of us. So removing the brakes put on yourself to where you need to, to where the least will be made greatest. No, feel free and unleashed to go out and make something of yourself, to accomplish things, to be proud of yourself. Our gods, we want them to be proud of us. And we worship them in large part through deed and through accomplishment. So you start rebuilding self-worth by accomplishment, by doing, and by being proud of yourself when you do and when you accomplish things. We want to earn the pride of our gods and our ancestors. We do that by doing our best to be winners in our lives. And you begin to stop hating yourself when you give yourself something to be proud of. So, literally start tomorrow finding things to do and take pride in them, things to achieve, ways to win, and take pride in your victories.
Again, we've been told now for centuries that pride is pride is the absence of, it's the opposite of a virtue. And that's not something we teach. That's not something that we preach. That's not something that we practice. We celebrate men and women who do great things in the face of adversity. And so many people get chained to stuff in their past. Because I can imagine if someone is feeling real self-hatred, there's probably an event in their past that they're chained to. And I would tell them, cut those chains. That our memories are supposed to be a well of wisdom. We learn from our victories, sure, but we don't rest on them. When it comes to traumatic experiences and things like that, rather than looking at it as because of this thing, I can't move forward. That's the wrong way to look at it. I'm still here in spite of that which happened to me. Again, the way we think, the way we speak, these things have a way of working themselves out in the mind and in the soul. There's that phrase, and it takes on a cheap meaning, but I don't mean it cheaply. Is that you fake it until you make it kind of thing. Stacking those little victories on top of themselves, and again, not letting things in the past hold you back, and to keep that first and forefront in your mind is that you're here in spite of those things, and you're still kicking, you're still fighting.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight, Daniel. I appreciate you. Thank you for all of the people with their great questions in the chat room. And thank you for our very generous donors for helping us out. We appreciate y'all. Go out there and act right and become more pious. I think it was a really good topic, and I'm glad it's something we got to discuss on that this evening.
Do right and fear no one.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I will talk to you guys next week when Svan will be back for us to continue our working through the Gylfaginning. Until then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Remember, victory never sleeps.